Why do some animations look as smooth as butter and yet somehow still feel flat and forgettable? Well, if you see my previous video I made, you'll know that story is the secret key to bringing life and depth to an animation. But now, what does it actually look like to craft a quality story that leaves a lasting impression on the viewer, making them want to come back again and again and again, just because the story and animation blended together so well? Well, today I'm going to show you 3 simple secrets that will add meaning and clarity to your storytelling without the whole process feeling like a hassle, because I know a lot of people think that storytelling is a hassle, but if you do it right, it actually isn't. It actually is very helpful. And as I explain these secrets, I'll also be building a story alongside this video to show you exactly how it works. And be sure to stick around until the end, because I have a free storytelling cheat sheet that will help you to craft amazing stories every single time. So be sure to stick around for that, and with that said, let's begin. Telling a good story is actually easier than you think, but the key to telling a great story is by starting with the foundation. Well, that leads us to secret number 1, and that is to define the purpose of your story. Define why you're making this animation and what the actual moral or underlying message of it is, and more importantly, how you want the viewer to feel when they are watching it. A good message in a story is like, have you ever heard of like MSG before? If you haven't, you've definitely had it before without knowing it. It's basically an ingredient that every single fast food restaurant puts in their food to make the food like super addicting and makes you want to come back to it again and again and again. It's really not that healthy, but it does do its job. And as weird as it sounds, a good message in your story is like MSG in a chicken sandwich. You just can't stop coming back to it over and over and over again. Really weird analogy, but my point is that a good message in a story is really addicting in a good way. Like if you just had an animation of like Lego Man makes breakfast, there's no like cool message or moral in there that actually gets the viewer excited and engaged with your animation. And even if you make it like really pop with the lighting and all that good animation stuff, it's just not going to be very interesting to watch overall. And there's just nothing that makes the viewer want to come back to it. Whereas if you had a good message or moral in your animation, it just makes it so much better and more engaging and entertaining to the viewer, and makes them want to stick around to see how this moral actually plays out in this story. It could be like a simple character trait that your main character has that like teaches like it's some conscious lesson of like virtue or something, and it's just like really good and really gets people excited, all that good stuff. And your message doesn't have to be deep either. Like I'm working on the Iron Squad right now, which is a like 8-minute to 10-minute long Star Wars brick film, and there's no like clear message in it per se. It's mainly just a bunch of comedic moments in an animation and like super funny and hilarious characters. And it's just, it will like just make you laugh the entire way through. And that's kind of like the message I have, is to just have fun and laugh. Like there's no like deep characteristic trait that gets them forward, maybe some perseverance or whatever. But right now it's just a super funny brick film that is just like carefree. And that's kind of the message of the brick film. So I say that to say your message doesn't have to be deep. It can be as simple as making a silly animation to get people to laugh. Alright, now that we know the first secret of telling a good story, let's put this into practice with our little mock story. Okay, let's see. What moral or underlying message do I want to put in this animation? I think I want the moral of this story to be about perseverance in spite of like really challenging events. And that's pretty basic, I know, but I kind of want to ride with that because I feel like I can make a good story out of that. Alright, now, okay, so we have perseverance, but how do I want the viewer to feel when they're watching my animation? Okay, so let's see. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel like pumped up when they watch this animation, like almost like they're ready for an adventure, maybe. And also, I want this to be a comedic animation so that way they are inspired, but also laughing and like watching a silly animation at the same time. So I want this to be about perseverance and endurance, but also overall a silly animation. I think that's going to be my clear underlying message and moral. Okay, but now that we know how we want the viewer to feel, how do we write the story in an interesting way that doesn't feel flat and lifeless? Well, that's where secret number 2 comes into play, and that is to think in arcs. No, I'm not talking about animation arcs, the secret to smooth animation. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about arcs in your storytelling. What is that? Well, don't think of a story in a form of a straight line from point A to point B. Great stories are not linear, and they consist of many ups and downs throughout the whole thing. Think in terms of build-up and release. What do I mean by build-up and release? Well, a build-up is basically some scenes that build up to this like pinnacle point, okay? And then the release would be all of that built-up emotion or whatever released into this particular moment. And this is where like a bunch of conflict happens, maybe like a really good resolution takes place, or maybe the release is an up in the story followed by a down and an up again and then a down, and there's just like you don't know what's about to happen next. It's not going to just progressively get better from the starting point to the end point of the story. There's instead going to be some conflict, some drama, some like conflicting areas of your story. There might be just something that happens, maybe a plot twist, maybe not. We don't know. That's the point of build up and release. It keeps the viewer engaged and keeps them on the edge of their seat at every single scene in your animation. All right, so now let's build out our mock story using this idea of build up and release. Now, you're probably wondering what this thing is. Well, it's actually called the 3-act structure or the hero's journey. And it's literally the template that every single feature film, short film, TV show, you name it, uses in every single story. If you don't believe me, then next time you watch your favorite film, just take this sheet with you and go analyze where the introduction happens, where the inciting incident happens, where the adventure begins. It's all like a loose format that helps to keep your stories like intact and coherent with each other. And it's really helpful when building out your stories. And that's what we're going to do here. So let's review. Our moral and message is about perseverance. We want the viewer to feel inspired. We want the animation to feel silly and funny to get people to laugh while also feeling inspired at the same time. That's the core moral of the story. Okay, so now let's build around that. Let's use this template as kind of like some inspiration for us to build our story off of. Let's start with the introduction. Who is the character? Who's the main character? The main character, let's name him Bob. I name all my main characters Bob when I start them out because I don't really care about a name. And yeah, this is Bob. He's just a normal dude. Nothing much about him. Let's see. What's the inciting incident happens? What is the incident that literally starts the story and like is like the starting point for the whole entire story? Well, we gotta have some sort of conflict going on, right? We gotta have like somebody took something, somebody did something. Let's say Bob. This is gonna be a silly story, right? So let's say Bob had a breadstick. All right, and I don't know why, but he like really enjoys his breadstick. He doesn't eat it. He just walks around with it, okay? This is his prized possession, this breadstick. Well, one day, the inciting incident, Bob loses his breadstick. He left it beside his bed last night, and he woke up, and there's no breadstick. Well, the call to adventure would be he starts looking for the breadstick. And then he looks all over his house for it. But the hero's denial is that he has lost hope. Okay? But then he looks outside and the adventure begins. Now he's looking outside for it. Now he's going on this adventure of looking for the breadstick. And then the B story comes in. The B story can be maybe his friend Joe is like, hey, he's like the comedic relief in the story. He's like coming up with these wacky ideas. He's like, hey, why don't we do this? And, it's like kind of that sort of ordeal where like Bob's like, that literally makes no sense, but somehow they always go with Joe's ideas, and it gets them in these like crazy circumstances, super goofy, makes zero sense, but it's all in the pursuit of finding this breadstick. And the midpoint where everything falls apart, where would that be? Well, we could just have it where they lose hope finding the breadstick, but that's kind of basic. There's nothing interesting with that. Let's say they get captured. Let's say they went deep in the woods and they found this like village of people and they captured them, and let's say the chief of this village has the breadstick, and they get thrown in the prison. All right. Well, the Dark Night of the Soul is literally the lowest point of the film, where they're in the prison, they lost all hope. Maybe Joe gives Bob a pep talk like, hey man, we can still do this. We've gone this far. There's no point in stopping now. Maybe pull in an inspirational quote or something. I don't know. But that's where like the perseverance kicks in. They've looked for days through the woods for this breadstick. They're captured now, but they're still pushing through. They're not giving up. And then the breakthrough is where they talk a guard into like letting them out. Maybe he likes bread and the chief won't give him any bread. So they're like, hey, we'll give you a piece of bread if you let us out. I don't know. I'm just thinking like random thoughts here. I did not plan ahead on this. So just critique my story in the comments. But then the final battle is where they battle out with the chief for the breadstick. And here we go. What if Bob is like too attached to this breadstick? All right. And what if during the whole story, Joe is just like, hey, Bob, I think you're too attached to this breadstick, right? And so the whole moral of the story is like, don't be greedy. Ooh. Okay. So now we have a new moral to the story. It's not just about perseverance. It's perseverance with the end goal of teaching not to be greedy and sharing, maybe. Okay. So what if we have the final battle? They're fighting against this tribe, this village, mainly just a chief. Maybe Bob and the chief have a face-off, okay, for this breadstick, okay? And what if during the battle, what if the chief is like, I haven't had bread for 22 years. I just wanted a piece of bread. And then Bob feels like really sorry for him. And what if Bob just decides to just share his breadstick with the whole village, okay? What if that's the resolution, a new normal, where he's like, I have been withholding this stale loaf of bread for how many years, and now I'm going to share it with the world. My moldy, stale loaf of bread. I don't know. It's plastic. It's not moldy. It's all good. So he shares it with the whole village. They become united. And it's just a happy ending you never saw coming. What if that's the story? I literally just came up with that on the whim. Like, other than the breadstick idea, I literally did not pre-plan this story. So what if that's the story? The introduction is Bob, ordinary guy. You just show him, like, having this breadstick and, like enjoying looking at it like too much. He's hoarding it. Inciting incidents where it gets away. He can't find it. Yada, yada, yada. Bob and Joe end up in this village. They get captured. The chief has the breadstick. And after the final battle, the resolution is that Bob shares this breadstick with the whole village. What if that's the story? And the 3-act structure made it very easy to just map out what happens next, and it makes it really easy to tell a good story. It's a proven framework that is worth putting your stories through every single time. And this is a great story and all, but let's be real, this is going to be at least a 5 to 10 minute long animation, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to make a 5 to 10 minute long animation. I'm already making a 10 minute long animation. But what if you want to tell the same story, but not make it a 10 minute long, endeavor. How could you possibly do that? Well, that's where secret number 3 comes into play, and that is to keep it simple. You see, you don't need a big animation to tell a great story. Simpler stories are easier to make, easier for the viewer to watch, and overall more memorable because there's no time for fluff. In short, the simpler the story, the better. So you'll typically want to avoid going overboard and start making your animation super ambitious and almost unrealistic, right? So how you do that is to define the core message and story structure in simplest terms possible. This is why secret number 1 is to define your core moral and message, because this is literally the foundation of your story. And you can take down the whole house and rebuild it as long as you have this solid foundation. So you're going to want to rebuild your story to be short while still getting the same idea across. Well, how do we actually do this? Well, let's pull up our hero's journey template here and redefine our mock story to be a lot simpler and less ambitious. So instead of this 10-minute long animation, let's break it down. Let's try to aim for 3 minutes, okay? Because I want to make a 2 to 3 minute animation and not rush everything. So let's see how we can cut this down and make it like the bare bones, so that way we can tell the same core message without all the fluff. So I think the beginning can easily run way too long, because you have Bob looking through his house, you have them looking in the woods. So it has to get to the midpoint pretty quick. I want to wrap this up and get to the midpoint pretty quick, right? What if Bob and Joe are actually in the beginning here, and they are sitting on a bench, and Bob is talking about how much he loves his breadstick. He has it in his hand. He's talking about it, and during the discussion, this short 20-second dialogue, the camera cuts to Joe and then back to Bob. And when it cuts back to Bob, he doesn't have the breadstick in his hand. And he looks at his hand and he sees that the breadstick is gone. Okay, that's the quick call to adventure within 20 seconds, okay? That makes it a lot better because we're defining that he likes his bread a lot, and that it's missing, without having to tell this story with him with his breadstick and then him having to look for the breadstick in his house. It just cuts all that fluff. That was a lot of fluff. It needed to be cut out. So yeah, Bob and Joe sitting on a bench talking about how much he loves his breadstick, and then it just disappears. So within 20 seconds, we went from introduction to call to adventure. All right, that's sweet. All right, now let's go to hero's denial. Well, let's say for this story, we don't even look at this. Parts of this template you can just skip altogether. Of course, you're going to want a resolution and introduction, but in the middle, it's really just subjective to what you want in your story. Let's see. Let's skip the hero's denial. Let's go to adventure begins. Okay. So Bob and Joe, they don't see the breadstick, so they immediately see some bushes rustling in the woods. All right. So they immediately go and run there. We skip the B story because Joe's already there. All right, sweet. We don't need an introduction because it introduced both of the characters all at once, saved us a lot of time there. All right, and the midpoint is where they follow the trace into the woods, and they get immediately thrown into prison. And it's this village right on the other side of the woods. Sweet. We don't even really need to do anything else after that. We have quickly went through the beginning portion. We established everything we wanted to establish all in 20 seconds. They bolt to the woods. They get captured, and that all happens within a minute. And the next 2 minutes can be the villager guard talking about how he hasn't had bread in so long, and then Bob and Joe coercing him into letting them out so they can give him some bread, and then the chief saying how he hasn't had bread in 22 years, and all that can all be done in 3 minutes, from introduction to the resolution. All be done in 3 minutes. Now we really cut down the story, not even that much. We just cut out all the fluff and got right to the core of the story. And now we just made it a lot more exciting to watch and engaging, and also cut down on the weeks we would have to spend animating the thing. So we just knocked out 2 things there. just by simplifying the story. And I'm pretty happy with that story, and all I gotta do is write out the script and some dialogue and some scene descriptions, and boom, I got a story ready to animate. And just like that, we have a simpler story to animate. And as you can see, you actually have the advantage when making shorter animations, because it forces you to make the story tighter and more engaging and fun to watch. So in short, simpler is often better. And there you have it. Those are the 3 secrets to effective storytelling in your animations. And just to recap, whenever you're coming up with a story, be sure to define your message and moral of the story, such as perseverance, or sharing, or something else. Tell your story in arcs by thinking in terms of build up and release, and referring to the hero's journey if need be. And lastly, keep it simple and strip down your story to its very core to keep the story as interesting and engaging as possible. Do these 3 things and you'll be well on your way to telling great stories that stick with the viewer and separate your animations from the crowd. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions or storytelling tips to share, then be sure to comment them down below. And as promised, as a reward for sticking around until the end, I wanted to give you a free gift, and that is my free animator storytelling cheat sheet. What this is a simple checklist that you can run each and every one of your stories through to make sure that they are a-okay for animating. But also underneath the checks, there is a comprehensive guide explaining each and every check and what it actually does to your overall story. It's a super handy guide. I had a lot of fun making it. I even learned some stuff myself when I made it, and yeah, it's gonna be awesome. Be sure to check it out, link in the pinned comment below. And with that said, thank you so much for watching, God bless you, and have an awesome rest of your day.